Hello and welcome everyone to another episode in this Grandmaster Chess series in which I review chess games by the top chess players in the world to see what we can learn. And today we are congratulating Magnus Carlsen on winning his fifth World Rapid Chess Championship. This World Chess Championship just occurred over the last few days, and Magnus came out on top. It was played in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, and it was 13 rounds, I believe. So heading into the final day, Magnus was tied for first with Vladimir Fedoseev. So hopefully I pronounced that correctly. And we see that he is a 2683 player, and Magnus is about 2830 here. And the game had a time control of 15 minutes with 10 seconds added per game. So the games might not have been perfect because they were trying to race against the clock towards the end. But if we look at this game review, it looks like Magnus Carlsen had 7 great moves. Neither player had brilliant moves, but they did have some inaccuracies. 8 by Magnus's opponent versus 4 for Magnus. And then Magnus had 5 mistakes versus 4 for his opponent. But his opponent had 4 misses to Magnus's 2, and they had no blunders. So they played a pretty solid game. And if I go back to the bottom here and look at the rating, so it looks like Magnus's opponent played at a 2900 level in this game, and Magnus played at 3100. And for the opening, 98% accuracy for Vladimir Fedoseev. Hope I pronounced that correctly, versus 98.4 for Magnus. And then 80.8 in the middle game versus 84.1 for Magnus. So let's take a look at this game and see how it turned out. So Magnus had the black pieces, and the game began with d4 here. And his opponent, playing Magnus Carlsen, the top player in the world right now. And so he plays d4, trying to play solid and not too risky. Magnus responds with knight to f6, which develops a piece, controls the center, and kind of waits to see what his opponent will do. And now c4 is played. So a common idea in chess is to put 2 of your pawns side by side in the center, whether it's e4 and d4. But in this case, e4 cannot be played, or the knight would just capture. So c4 is played to help try and lock down some of the center. And so Magnus now plays e6. So this move allows the bishop to develop here, and then black will be ready to possibly castle quickly. But this move also helps to fortify d5 here, so with a possible pawn push to d5. So now we have knight to c3. White just continues development here. So now he's even threatening to play e4 and take a big control or a big controlling interest in the center here by pushing all 3 of these pawns in the middle. So what does Magnus do? He plays bishop to b4 here. So this is the Nimzo Indian defense, where in this position there's kind of a fight for the center, and this knight is doing a good job of covering d5 and e4, which would try and allow white to just push forward in the center. So Magnus pins the knight to the king here to reduce the effectiveness of this knight. So now we have knight to f3. So his opponent just continues developing pieces here. And now Magnus does something interesting here. He trades his bishop for the knight. So if we go back and look here, the computer does not recommend that as the best move. It prefers just playing b6 and developing this knight, or excuse me, this bishop, maybe fianchettoing down through the center of the board. Because e6 is played, this bishop could become trapped in behind its pawns, and so that's why you might want to move this bishop to b7. So that's what the computer recommends, either that or castling. But Magnus decides to get rid of his bishop pair, give up his bishop pair. Usually you don't want to do that, but in exchange, he takes away some of the strength in the center that knight had by controlling these squares. And when the opponent recaptures here, now Vladimir has doubled pawns here, which can become could be a long-term weakness, and also this isolated pawn here, which could be a long-term weakness as well. So, in exchange, Magnus, for giving up his bishop pair, has created some weaknesses on the queen side here. So now, how will Magnus try and take advantage of the weaknesses he's created here? Well, he plays slowly to kind of develop and see what his opponent does. He played d6, which is excellent, trying to just control squares in the center here, and then possibly allowing a c5 pawn push here to just gain more control of these pawns, because white would like to push at some point this c pawn and get rid of these doubled pawns, and Magnus wants to lock those down and make sure that white keeps that long-term weakness of doubled pawns. So we'll see how the game will revolve around these pawns for the majority of the game. So queen to c2, just a good developing move of the queen, kind of eyeing the center here, keeping this knight from being able to jump down and possibly attack the c pawn. But more importantly, this queen move now will allow the e4 pawn push in the center. So Magnus plays queen to e7, just developing his queen and lining up on his opponent's king. And now we have a4. But the computer says that this is an inaccuracy, that an immediate e4 would have been better. With a4, the opponent tries to grab space on the queen side with this a4 move. And let's see what the computer recommends instead. So it looks like it just wants this immediate e4 move to try and gain control of the center here. And then, that may allow the push of this d pawn up here, at some point. But we'll see that here in a little bit. So a4 is played, grabbing space on the queen side. And now Carlsen counterattacks with c5 here, attacking the more important central pawn with this less valuable pawn on the side. But, of course, Fedoseev, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, he doesn't want to capture here, or then he would just end up with these doubled pawns, and they would be isolated and weaker than the three of these pawns together. And now he would love for Magnus to capture and get rid of his doubled pawns, But of course, Magnus doesn't do that. So continuing on, finally e4 is played, but now the computer prefers slightly more this h3 pawn push, maybe to keep this knight out, but I don't see Magnus making that move anytime soon. Maybe a h3 move would allow g4 to start pushing forward to try and gain space on the king side. So Magnus plays e5, and the computer says that this is a great move. So he just locks down the center here, putting both of his pawns, the e pawn and the c pawn here, lined up on this important d4 pawn. And so not wanting to break things open, especially with this queen and knight lined up on this e4 pawn, what does Magnus's opponent do? He pushes forward and locks up the center. So now we have an interesting part of chess strategy in which when the center is locked up, now play will occur on the wings, on the queen side and the king side here. So with that in mind, Magnus just continues developing. The computer says this is a mistake that jumps the game to 0.65 in white's favor, and that a5 would have been better to just, like I said, play on the wings, grab space on the queen side, and kind of lock down this a pawn, because this isolated pawn could become a target. And when you lock it down and prevent it from moving, it immobilizes that pawn. And an immobile pawn is an easier target, because if the pawn is attacked and it can move, it's a little bit harder to go after that pawn. But Magnus just develops his other knight, and now we have h4, and this is a miss. So after this move, the game is even. The computer liked this move better, knight to h4, which maybe would, eye this f5 square, although I guess Magnus could have played this move here, g6, but that would create some weaknesses. But anyway, his opponent did not play that. He played h4. Now, as I said, since the center is locked up, both sides will want to play on the wings, and so they're pushing their pawns forward to make more room for their pieces to move around behind these pushed pawns. So Magnus pushes forward here to keep the knight out of this g5 square, and also limit the scope of the bishop. And now we have, well, before I go on, once again, the computer wants a5, gaining space on the queen side. But Magnus plays h6, and now we have just another developing move, bishop to e2. But once again, the computer wants more play on the wings and says that a5 would have kept white with a small lead here, gaining more space on the queen side. So after bishop to e2, now we have an interesting move, which the computer says this is a mistake by Carlsen. Instead of castling, what does Magnus do? He just moves his king over, and we'll see where this king is going as the game progresses. But this is something normally you wouldn't want to do, leave your king stranded in the center. But this is not as dangerous when the center is locked up, and there's not any immediate chance of the position opening up and causing problems for this king. So the king is still pretty safe here. But let's see what Magnus has in mind. Once again, a5 is what the computer wants to gain space on the queen side. So now the knight repositions here to d2, and it shows that white is ahead by half a pawn's worth of material. So from here, This allows the f pawn to push forward, and then this knight can reposition. Now, the king continues its journey across the board over here with king to c7. And the computer says that is good now, but once again, it preferred a5, gaining space on the queen side. And now the knight repositions back to the bottom of the board here. And now the computer's saying this is a mistake, that a5, gaining space, would have been better. So now we have g6, and the computer says this is a miss, that a5 should have been played to keep the space on the queen side equal. But let's see what Magnus is up to here. He wants to set up this pawn formation probably with g6 and then h5. So in order to stop that, g4 is played, but the computer says that this is a mistake and it would have been better once again to push that a pawn forward. Okay, so now finally Magnus plays a5, keeping the space even on the queen side here. And now as we move forward, literally this pawn on h5 jumps up here to h5, and we have an exchange of pawns. And so now white is left with more space here on the queen side. So let's see how white and black try and use this space on the king side here. And there'll probably be a battle for control of this open G file here. All right, so the knight moves out of the way here, which allows this bishop to develop. And now we have the knight jumping forward here and possibly eyeing this f5 square and guarding the pawn, helping to block this open G file. But of course the bishop is guarding this f5 square. All right, continuing on, the bishop develops. And now we have the bishop and knight piling up on this pawn, but at the moment it's guarded by a rook and the queen. So queen to b3 is played, and the computer prefers just pushing this f pawn forward here. But maybe white didn't want to move that f pawn because right now it's doing a good job of guarding the knight, which is kind of blocking this open G file. And here the queen and maybe a rook could possibly at some point line up on the B pawn here and possibly have some threats against the king. But Magnus repositions his knight here back to the back rank, and we'll see what he's doing here in a second. But it looks like knight to e8. The computer says that's a miss, and it would have been better to bring the queen up to e8. And let's take a look at what Magnus's idea is here. So after his opponent plays bishop to e3, so if we go back and look at that, it looks like just rook to b1 is preferred, but maybe white just didn't want to give up this pawn here. So let's take a look. Bishop to e3, just developing the bishop, and now Magnus brings the knight back here to g7, and then from here it kind of keeps an eye on this f pawn, or sorry, this f5 square to keep the knight out of there. And it works with the bishop as well. So they're both guarding that. And this puts some more pressure on this weak, isolated h pawn here. All right, so the king moves forward, connecting the rooks, and also helping protect the bishop. And, the main idea behind this king move is just to give your rooks more room to maneuver here on the back rank. All right, so Magnus decides to push forward here with this pawn break. And the threat is if this pawn pushes forward, it could fork two of these pieces. And now it looks like the computer prefers f4 to just block the pawn push. But in the game, a capture occurs here. So now Magnus just responds by recapturing with the knight, which is best. And here, instead of just recapturing, we have the rook lining up with this threat here. The threat of capturing the knight and checking the king. So what does Magnus do? He plays a great move here and brings his rook up, and it basically protects the knight here, and prevents the queen from just moving up here and causing problems. And Magnus, he's kind of known for using his rooks in interesting ways. So the average person would just keep the rooks on the back rank and then move them to the open files. But a lot of times Magnus will move his rooks up the side of the board and then be able to move them in towards the center or wherever they need to go. But here he's just defending the knight. All right, so we have a capture, a recapture here. So white maintains the bishop pair, but the board is so blocked and congested that these bishops, they're not doing as much. This knight is probably more valuable in this position because it can jump over this closed center here. All right, so rook to b2. So now maybe white could be planning to double his rooks up here and try and put more pressure on, but Magnus is holding things together just fine. So instead of that move, the computer prefers bishop to d3 to just attack here. All right, so let's see. Looks like after bishop to d3, if this move would have been played, bishop to d3, then it's recommended that instead of trading material, bishop to d7 would be better and put more pressure on this a pawn. So the queen moves over here, taking control of the open g file. And so white retreats his queen back to try and cover and keep this queen out of the g file and prevent it from moving down and maybe attacking the rook or causing problems. And also it helps fortify this isolated h pawn. All right, so now we have Magnus playing another great move here, doubling up on the g file, taking complete control of this g file. And so now king to c1 is played. The king just remaneuvers here, and the game continues with queen to h7. So the queen gets out of the way of the rook, so the rook can come down, go down the g file here, creates a battery with queen and bishop to put pressure down through the center of the board. And now we have the rook moving over here to protect this pawn and release the queen from guard duty where it can move over here. And now Magnus, seeing that there's not much going on, not much that he can do over here on the queen side, repositions his knight. So now the rook is placed on this half open file, and the knight continues its journey to try and find a better position. But it looks like rook to b6 was preferred by the computer. But, Magnus probably didn't want to trade off more pieces in the position. So he avoids exchanges and does not put his rook here on the b file. So the game continues with the knight repositioning. Now there's a fight for the g file, and Magnus captures. And the computer says this is a great move. It gets rid of the rook, which was fighting for this file. The queen recaptures. And now we have rook to a6. And now this rook will be able to reposition over here to the g file and chase this queen out and take control of the g file. So here we have f4 being played. So the computer prefers queen to h2, but this move is still excellent as well. And so, as I mentioned, the rook swings over, and the computer says this is a great move. But Magnus is just taking control of this g file. And turn on a light. It's starting to get dark in here. Now we have rook to g8 attacking the queen. So the queen is chased away, moves to h2 to keep an eye on this weak isolated pawn here. And now, interesting move by Carlsen. He didn't want to capture this pawn or allow it to be recaptured and kind of open the position up. So he just presses his pawn forward, and it kind of keeps the center blocked. And that really limits the power of these bishops. Especially this bishop here is not doing much at all. It's just guarding this pawn, and it's really blocked in. And now, because of this e4 pawn move, now it really limits the scope of this bishop as well. The pawn cannot come up here and put any pressure in the future on the other bishop, and both these bishops are just playing guard duty now, and they're really at a disadvantage in this blocked center. And so now rook to b1 is played, which will allow this rook to swing over here and fight for the g file after the king moves. And now queen to d7. So we have a battery with queen and bishop, but the queen is attacking this unprotected pawn here. So now bishop to d1 to guard this pawn, but the computer says that's an inaccuracy, that queen to h4 would have been better, which would have attacked this unprotected knight here. So the game continued with bishop to g4, and now the computer says this is an inaccuracy by Carlsen. So what does Carlsen's opponent do here? It looks like the best move would have been just queen to h4, but white would like to, keep his bishop pair. So he avoids trading material, and he just repositions the bishop here, keeping an eye on this e4 pawn. So the game continues with Magnus just moving his queen forward, putting a lot of pressure on this pawn here. So now, he's taking his time. This h pawn is just pretty much a goner. So the king starts a journey, retreating up here. Maybe he's thinking that, the king would be stuck in a dangerous spot out in the open. So he heads for cover here up the b file, and also lets the rook join the action over here on the king side. All right, so with this pawn capture, Magnus goes ahead in material. The computer prefers queen takes h5, but maybe Magnus didn't want to trade more material by capturing with the queen, and that could possibly allow his opponent to capture. Although now Magnus is ahead in material, And generally, you do not want to trade material. You don't want to trade pieces, I should say, whenever you are behind in material. When you're behind in material, you want to trade off as many pawns as you can. And the reason behind that is that basically, if you're behind in material, let's say you're even behind a knight or a bishop, if you trade off all the pawns, well, then there's less danger of those being promoted, of your opponent using that extra material to push one of those pawns forward. And, if everything else was traded off and they just were ahead one bishop or pawn, that's not enough to checkmate and the game would be a draw. All right, so we have rook to e1, a good move, but the computer prefers king to a3 to help guard this pawn and then release this guard duty of the bishop here, possibly. And now Magnus plays b6, and the computer says that's a mistake, that rook to g6 should have been played. But I don't know, maybe Magnus is just trying to fortify his pawns here in the center and give his king a little more room to move without this pawn being in the way. Or, by this point, I'm not sure how much time they have left on the clock. So maybe they're just trying to make good, solid moves quickly without running out of time. So king to b3 is played. And now the computer prefers a retreat by the bishop instead. But this king move is still good. Continuing on. So rook to g6 is played, which the computer wanted earlier. But now the computer is saying rook to h8 would be slightly better, but they're about the same. Continuing on, the queen retreats to h1, eyeing this passed e4 pawn along with the bishop. And if this bishop here moves, well then we could have a lot of pieces just piling up on this pawn. So now we have rook to g3, just moving forward, putting a little bit of pressure on the bishop, although it's protected. But if that bishop moves with the rook here, possibly in the future, the pawn would be able to push to e3. And that's your goal. When you have passed pawns, you want to try and push them. And if you're defending a passed pawn, you want to stop that pawn, no matter what. Put pieces in front of it, keep control of the squares in front of that pawn. And the game continues with queen to h4. And this is a mistake that jumps the game to 2.41, it looks like, in favor of black. So bishop to c1, just retreating and putting a lot of pressure on this pawn would have been better. So we could take a look at that. So the computer wants, let's see, bishop to d2. Now queen, rook, bishop are all piling up on this pawn, which is only protected by the knight and the queen. And it looks like preferred would be rook to h3, or second best move is bishop to f3. But computer says this is the best move, immediately attacking the queen. And then we have queen to g2, or giving up the bishop. So, I guess I'll look at, take a look at queen to g2 here. So after queen to g2, now it's saying bishop captures is best, but queen to g2, now we would have, let's see, bishop to g4. Well, that's interesting. Bishop to g4, you think that would leave this pawn under attack. So the second best move is just bishop to f3, guarding the pawn and guarding the pawn and attacking the queen. Okay, so first I'll look at bishop to g4 and see what that's all about. So it says that this would be a great move. Now it's recommending rook to e3, attacking this rook and blocking the pawn. Although let's take a look at what would happen if you would go ahead and just capture here. Capture. Now it's showing queen to h5. All right. Well, let's play along and take a look here. Queen to h5. Queen to g1. Knight takes e4. Rook takes e4. Rook to h1. Yeah, so this is some pretty complicated stuff here. So attacking the queen would have to move. And so now it prefers queen to f2. But then it looks like either bishop to d7 up here helping protect the king. Now it's saying that checking would have been better up here. But let's see, queen to f5. Queen to f5. And now queen to g2. Rook to h2. Wait, it's saying that's a mistake. Did I look at it wrong? Nope, queen to g2. Saying that's the best move. Queen to g2. Or queen to e3 now. It's saying that is better. So let's go back and take a look at that. Queen to e3. All right. So now it wants what? b5? b5. Huh. All right. Yeah, this just shows you how complicated some of these moves are. So, now this would help get rid of your doubled pawns. Now white has a passed pawn here. And then after king to b6, it does give some cover for the king. And now king to b2. King to b2 to prevent any surprises here. Rook to h3. Attacking the queen. Queen to e1. All right, yeah, so you get the picture. Really complicated stuff here. So we'll go back to what happened in the game. All right, so after queen to h1, we had rook to g3. Then queen to h4 here, and this was a mistake. So how does Magnus Carlsen take advantage of it? He plays a great move, the best move, rook to h3, attacking that queen. So now the queen retreats to f2 here. And then we have bishop to f3. So just keeping an eye on the e4 pawn and putting that bishop in a good offensive spot. All right, so now white tries to take control of the g-file, threatening a check up here. And it looks like the computer preferred queen to d2. But now Magnus just jumps his knight forward, the best move in the position, blocking the rook, attacking the queen and the bishop. So the queen retreats to the best square on e1 here. And now we have this passed pawn here, just marching up the board, helping to further fortify the knight. And now white is slowly getting squeezed here. He retreats his bishop, and now the rook jumps up here on the 7th rank, adding more pressure to white's position. Now the queen tries to do something here. This says this is the best move. So now we have the rook and the queen battery just lined up on this G file, but the knight is doing a great job of blocking things here. All right, so now Magnus plays not the best move. It still wants that b5 move, but why would you give white a passed pawn and then help him get rid of his isolated or his doubled pawns? But that's what the computer wants. And bishop to e2 was played, which is also an excellent move. And now we have rook to e1. And if we take a look at that, already black is in the lead here. But after this move, black has even more of an advantage. It preferred rook to g2, just trying to get rid of this rook. So now we have a capture here. So interesting move. And if we go back, if the rook would have moved here, it would have kind of slowed down some of black's threats. But now, after this bishop move and then an attack on the bishop, maybe white overlooked this little bishop temporary sacrifice, grabbing a pawn, and now capture, recapture, and then white's queen moves up here, threatening to chase the black king by jumping up here to e7, causing problems. So now we have king to d7 to stop that. So now the queen cannot, jump up here into black's position. But the computer says that queen to h7 would have been better. So, that's pretty interesting. Just retreating the queen back. And it says that that would be, a decent amount better than just king to d7. So we could take a look at that. So queen to d7, or sorry, h7. Well, here it's saying it's the third best move and that knight to f6 would be better. So, I don't know, just pretty funny how sometimes the computer is even a little, having problems trying to figure out what Magnus Carlsen is doing. Even the computer is getting confused by his moves. So, if we play this d7 move, or what was it? F7, sorry, or H7. I think that's what the computer originally said. Yeah, here it's saying that this is the best move. Keeps an eye on this pawn in the center here. Guards this pawn. The only thing, there could be a possible threat, I guess, of the rook jumping here and then trying to attack the knight, which this pawn is pinned to the queen. Anyway, before we go too deep into some crazy line, let's finish this game up. Queen to h4, or sorry, king to d7. So queen to h4 was the last move played by white here. And then we have king to d7 to prevent that queen from moving into the position. And now bishop to e3, and this is a miss. So the computer really wanted queen to g5 here which, that would basically just protect this pawn, I guess. So we'll take a look at that. The pawn is already protected by the bishop. And now, let's see. Once again, b5 is what the computer wants. Here it's saying this is a mistake. So, okay, I think I played the wrong move. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. Yeah, I played the wrong move. No wonder the game took a crazy turn there. So, this was the move that it wanted. And, trying to trade off queens here. And then give white this passed pawn over here. But it looks like best would be queen to f7. Just moving back, guarding this h pawn. And now rook to h1 would be best. Putting pressure on that pawn. And now, Magnus would just have this move, blocking. So, after capture, queen to g2 attacks the knight and the pawn at the same time. So, the fork here. Let's see. And now it's just showing the best move would be here. The second best would be knight to f3 to block the line of attack there. But after this, and then of course the queen would snatch up this pawn. Well, now it looks like we have h4 sending this pawn marching. And now king to b3. King to b3. Oh, to let the queen get off of guard duty here. And then this pawn just continues marching. Well, now, let's see, f5. White would start marching a pawn of his own. But then it looks like knight to f6 works here. So let's make sure we look at that correctly. Yeah, at this point, it's showing that black is in the lead quite a bit here. And this passed pawn, is going to be a problem. Okay, back to the game here after queen to h4. We have the king moving over to prevent a check by that queen. The bishop moves up, and this is a miss. And now we have the rook jumping over here, helping guard this knight. And, if the knight moves, well, we'll just see what happens here. The queen attacks, but now the rook moves up, putting pressure on the bishop along with the knight. So they're piling up on this piece. The bishop retreats, and now we have knight to f6 by Magnus, which is best. And so now this is a problem as the knight and the queen are piling up on this pawn, and the queen could capture with a check here. So rook to d1 here, just protecting the pawn. And Magnus just blocks this. So rook to d3. This is a good move, but the computer prefers pushing this passed pawn. So capture, pawn captures, and now this pawn is even further up the board. And now, let's see here. We also have, well, this threat of the capturing here, although right now that's not possible because the queen is guarding there. But let's see. Well, I don't know. Magnus is winning here. And this is definitely a winning advantage. So let's see how he does it. The king just runs. So interesting. Is that the best move? It looks like queen to g2 would have been better. But Magnus has two passed pawns here. And they're going to be trouble for his opponent. So maybe at this point his opponent just had time trouble and just starts running for cover. I'm curious as to why he didn't just guard this. So the computer prefers queen to g2, but then we have king to c7, bishop to d2 to block this passed pawn, and now h4. This passed pawn starts marching. Queen to g5, queen to e4, check, king to b5, and now the knight would just capture here. And yeah, at this point, Magnus would really be winning. He's just capturing, another pawn here, so he's ahead in material by +3. So Magnus has what, 4, 5, 6 pawns to 3. The bishop is blocked in by its own pawns. The knight and the queen are hovering around the king here. So I don't know. It's just not looking good at this point for Magnus's opponent. It's pretty grim. Okay, back to the game and see if we can finish this out. So the king runs for cover. Magnus swoops in, capturing another pawn here. And now the queen jumps up here with queen to h3, which is an excellent move, but it prefers the capture. But white is behind in material and doesn't want to trade down even more material. And so we have king to c7, just moving over here, protecting this pawn. So if we go back here, now why didn't white capture that? So let's take a look. It's white's turn to move here. If he captures this, well, now there's a mate in 4. Oh, well, actually, my mistake. That move would never be played. Let me delete that because the queen's under attack. So if we go back, Magnus captures the pawn, attacking the queen. So his opponent avoids the trade here. And now we have the king guarding this pawn. And this move, c4, which is a mistake that leads to a mate in 3. So the only thing I can imagine is that at this point, his opponent is just running out of options. And he was also, let me go back. He was probably also really worried about this threat. So Magnus is just hunting this king down. So you have this threat of queen to b3, checking here. And the only move would be to run up here, and you're just going to end up getting trapped in the corner and mated. So the computer prefers queen to e3. So we could take a look at that. Queen to e3, threatening a check, but why not queen to b6 here? Wouldn't that lead to an immediate mate? Or not b6, queen to b3, sorry about that. Queen to b3 is good. Wait a minute, queen to b3 check is good. but it's saying c4 would have been better. Okay. Well, yeah, now the king can only go to a6. And then queen to c4. Okay, I see. He can't maneuver up there. His own pawn is in the way. All right, let's take a look here. So the king guards that pawn. Now this is played, which it says it's a mistake. But at this point, he's just really running out of options. So c4 attacking the queen. But now we have this threat. Check. What does the king do? The only move available is here. And now, what does Magnus play here? Well, b5, and his opponent resigned. Because we have a check here by the queen. No matter what the king does, whether the king moves here to a7, well, then it's queen mate here on b7. The game may have continued with king captures and then mate here. Excuse me. All right, yeah, so mate, because this pawn cuts off his escape square there, and his own pawn is in his way. So anyway, you get the idea. The other option would have been for the king to move up the board, and then that would lead to a mate as well. So I assume the pressure just built up, and his opponent went running, and he just got trapped up here. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Grandmaster Chess. So congratulations to Magnus Carlsen with this game. So basically, Magnus Carlsen and his opponent, Vladimir Fedoseev, they were, along with one other player, Yu Yangzi, I believe, the three of them were tied for first going into the final day. And Magnus had to play Fedoseev. And after this win, that put Magnus in sole first place, and he just kept the lead for the final day. And so he goes on to win his fifth Rapid World Chess Championship. And so this Rapid Chess Championship started maybe 10 years ago, maybe I think 2012, I believe. Before that, they had Rapid and Blitz championships, I believe, but it wasn't. I don't think it was sanctioned by FIDE. It wasn't an official world title. So now, in current times after 2012, they have this official World Rapid Championship title. And Magnus has won it 5 out of the 10 years that it's been played. And he's basically, the other 5 times, I think he placed second once, third twice, and fifth twice. So it's pretty amazing. In 10 years that they've had this, he's won 5 and placed in the top 5 the other 5 times. So once again, congratulations, Magnus Carlsen. Great job. And, who knows how long Magnus's reign will continue. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've stuck around for the entire video, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions or any requests on what you would like to see in future videos. Thanks for watching, everyone, and have a super chess day.